Imagine fighting the Italian mafia in the midst of racial segregation and living to tell the tale. That's exactly what Ellsworth Raymond Johnson, better known as Bumpy, did. A man who rose from an oppressive South to dominate the streets of Harlem like no one else. But how did a rebellious kid from South Carolina end up negotiating with mob bosses like Lucky Luciano and becoming the Black Godfather of New York? Stay tuned, because what's coming will reveal a world of betrayals, street wars, and absolute power. And by the end, you'll be wondering whether he was a hero or just a survivor in a broken system. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, from which part of the world are you watching this video? I want to know how far the stories of these outlaws are reaching. Origins in the segregated South? Ellsworth Raymond Johnson was born on the 31st of October 1905 in Charleston, South Carolina, during the height of racial segregation in the United States. His family settled in the city's black neighborhood, living modestly but respected within their community. They were deeply religious and attended church regularly. His father, William, worked as a fisherman, while his mother, Margaret, was a domestic servant. The Johnsons had 8 children: Margie, Priscilla, Pauline, Willie, Mabel, Lena, Elise, and finally Ellsworth, who from a young age earned the lifelong nickname Bumpy due to a bump on the back of his skull. Around the age of 1 or 2, Bumpy spent an entire year living only with his father and brother Willie, as his mother held 2 jobs, one in Charleston and another in New York. She took her 3 oldest daughters, Pauline, Mabel, and Lena, to help with domestic work up north. Although Margaret returned to Charleston after her seasonal work in New York, her absence left a void in young Bumpy's life, and he sought a maternal figure in one of his older sisters. At school, Bumpy was described as incredibly intelligent and talkative, even skipping 2 grades in Charleston's public school system. Ironically, he never finished high school, a fact that embarrassed him, since his family placed great value on education. As a result, he often lied, claiming he had attended a prestigious school for wealthy black families in Charleston or even a university in New York. He was so clever and charming that no one questioned his claims of higher education. Bumpy also had a rebellious streak and was highly sensitive to the racial injustices faced by black people in the segregated South. In fact, when he was 10 years old, his family became embroiled in turmoil over these injustices. His 19-year-old brother Willie was accused of killing a white man in South Carolina, a region notorious for vigilante justice when a black person offended a white one. A chilling example was the horrific lynching of Kid Booker in 1,904 inches Berkeley County, about 60 kilometers from the Johnson home. The 21-year-old black man had gone fishing with 6 white men, but on the way back a dispute arose after one of them assaulted his younger sister and he sought revenge. He was arrested for the fight, fined $5 he couldn't pay, and jailed. A mob of white men demanded his release, tortured him, scalping him, gouging out his eyes, cutting off his genitals and tongue, then tied him to a grate and threw him into the river to drown. None of the perpetrators faced justice. When Willie returned home and said he was accused of killing a white man, the Johnsons panicked. Desperate to save their son from a likely lynching, they quickly got him out of town and sent him to New York, where Margie and Pauline already lived. Bumpy joined them later, in 1919. His father arranged for him to go live with his older sister Mabel in Harlem, hoping to give him a chance at a better life. At the time, Bumpy was 14, small for his age, but he made up for it with a tough guy attitude. As he grew older, his parents grew increasingly worried about his bad temper and lack of respect toward white people, further motivating the decision to send him north. Arrival in Harlem and first steps on the street. Harlem in 1919 was a world apart from the segregated South, a vibrant neighborhood in northern Manhattan, buzzing with energy. The Harlem Renaissance in full swing, jazz music spilling onto the corners, and the African American community carving out its space in a hostile city. That's where 14-year-old Bumpy Johnson arrived, sent by his father to live with his older sister Mabel in hopes of escaping the racial tensions that haunted him. He was undersized for his age, with a southern accent that branded him country, but he compensated with a tough demeanor that no one could ignore. From day one, Bumpy had to earn his place. Walking to school just 2 blocks away, he came across 6 teenagers shooting dice against the wall. He paused to watch, and as he continued on, one grabbed his arm. "Hey, country, what you got in your pocket?" "My hand," Bumpy replied. "You got a problem with that?" The kid, nicknamed Junie, laughed, but another close 6 and 8 stepped up, demanding he pull it out. Bumpy warned, "You don't want me to take my hand out, because if I do, I'm gonna smash it in your head." The others placed bets. Finley on 6, Nat on Bumpy. 6 threw the first punch, aiming for the chin but missed. Smaller and quicker Bumpy dodged, causing his opponent to lose balance. He pulled his hand from his pocket and, as promised, landed a direct blow to Six's face, breaking his nose. Blood sprayed everywhere. Six dropped to his knees but clung to Bumpy's pants. Another punch to the side weakened him further, and when coins fell from Bumpy's fist, Finley yelled, "That's not fair, he fights dirty." Bumpy kept swinging until Six let go, finishing him with a kick to the groin. He was going for more, but Nat grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against the car. "Okay, I won my money, but I'm not letting you kill my boy. Ready to fight Nat too." Bumpy shot back, "Screw you." Nat smiled and stepped back. "I'm not fighting you, man." "Like I said, I won my money, and lucky there was a bet, or we'd all have jumped you." Bumpy grinned, "And I'd have kicked all your asses, and I still will." After that, Bumpy, Nat, Finley, and Junie became inseparable friends, a bond that would last a lifetime. Bumpy never went back to school. Every morning he left Mabel's apartment to meet them. Together they hustled for money, shooting pool, playing craps, selling newspapers. Soon they were sweeping sidewalks in front of Harlem businesses for cash, but Bumpy, the brains of the group, saw a bigger opportunity, offering protection to new shops in the neighborhood. That's how he met Bob Hewlett, one of Harlem's most feared enforcers, who never left home without a knife, baseball bat, or gun. Bob used any excuse to pull his weapons, whether against police or Irish gangsters invading his turf. At 6'1", with an imposing build, he was the last person you wanted to cross. He made his living extorting businesses for protection from local thugs. One day, Bob heard about a new grocery store on 7th Avenue and went to offer his services. The owner said he'd already paid, pointing to Bumpy, who was leaning against Bob's black Lincoln, arms crossed, staring him down through the window. Bob laughed. That kid. 16-year-old Bumpy was facing a gangster nearly twice his age and 4 inches taller. "Get off my car, kid." "You know who I am?" "Yeah, you're Bob Hewlett. Now I'm off your car, so get off my block." "Your block? How the hell is this your block?" "Because me and my boys claimed it at least this store." Bob could have knocked him out with one punch, but he admired the kid's guts and offered a partnership. That marked the beginning of Bumpy's rise in Harlem's underworld. By then, Bumpy hadn't been to school in months. Mabel worried and urged him to return, but as she saw the money he brought home, she increasingly left him alone. In the 1,920 seconds, Bumpy and his crew lived off all sorts of rackets, plus robberies. They no longer just protected grocery stores or restaurants. They expanded to club owners and speakeasies during Prohibition, rise with Madame Stephanie Strickler. In the 1,920 seconds, the most lucrative business in Harlem was the numbers game, an illegal lottery that lured the poor with dreams of striking it rich. Bob Hewlett, who had taken a liking to Bumpy, suggested diversifying, offering protection to illegal lottery operators. Some of these bankers were the wealthiest people in the neighborhood, earning thousands tax-free every week. They spared no expense on the toughest bodyguards in town. Bumpy seized the opportunity and quickly became one of the best in the field. Soon, one of Harlem's most sought-after protectors. His reputation grew daily, and he was about to skyrocket thanks to the queen of the illegal lottery herself, Stephanie Strickler. Born in France, Stephanie Strickler was a gang leader who had built a vast criminal empire in the numbers racket by the 1,920 seconds. She hired Bumpy to guard one of her many operations. Impressed by his skills, she made him her personal bodyguard. Bumpy escorted her on visits, and a fast friendship formed. He admired her class, but also her readiness to fight for what was hers. That became clear in the 1,930 seconds when the mafia tried to muscle in on Harlem's illegal gambling. The numbers game generated huge profits in that part of New York, so it was only natural the mob wanted a piece. Dutch Schultz, a gangster tied to New York's 5 families, led the charge. Operating out of the Bronx, he had made a fortune bootlegging during Prohibition. In 1933, with Prohibition repealed, he needed new revenue streams to expand his empire and turn to the highly profitable Harlem numbers racket. We were in the depths of the Great Depression, and at that time an illegal betting game had spread across Harlem, the numbers game. It was like a lottery for the poor. The bettor picked 3 numbers, and if they came up the next day, they won a prize based on their wager. To play, all you needed was to bet $1 with the hope of winning $600. The temptation was immense for the people of Harlem, who typically earn only $10 to $15 a week. By the early 1,930 seconds, this racket was generating over $50 million annually, an enormous sum given the country's economic hardship. Some lottery bankers earned more than the President of the United States, which underscored the scale of the operation. It didn't take long for Dutch Schultz to catch wind of this opportunity. The war with Dutch Schultz marked a turning point in Bumpy Johnson's life and in the control of Harlem. It all began in the 1930 seconds, as the Great Depression ravaged the United States and the numbers game became a lifeline for many in the neighborhood. This racket generated over $50 million a year, a fortune in an era when people barely earned $10 to $15 weekly. Dutch Schultz, a white gangster from the Bronx tied to New York's 5 families, spotted his chance after Prohibition ended in 1933. He needed new revenue streams, and Harlem was the perfect target. Schultz wasted no time. He started intimidating independent lottery operators. His tactic was simple and brutal: join me or pay for protection. But that protection was from his own enforcers. Many surrendered out of fear, but Madame Street Claire, the queen of the numbers, stood her ground. She wasn't about to hand over her empire to a white outsider who didn't understand the neighborhood. Bumpy, her main partner and protector, stood firmly by her side. According to accounts from the time, Bumpy had just been released from prison in 1931 on minor charges and turned down an offer from Bob Hewlett, who was now working for Schultz. Instead, he aligned himself fully with Street Claire. Bumpy secretly organized a meeting with other black numbers bankers in Harlem. Not everyone joined. Some feared Schultz's power, but those who did formed an alliance to resist. The war was guerrilla style, quick strikes leveraging their knowledge of the terrain. Bumpy and his crew, including Nat, Finley, and Junie, would hit and vanish. A pivotal moment was the direct confrontation with Bob Hewlett. Despite Bob's reputation for violence, Bumpy didn't back down. Though there was no clear winner in that clash, Bob ended up arrested in 1933 on unrelated charges, weakening Schultz's side. Then came Ulysses Rollins, Schultz's new enforcer, an even crueler figure. He tried to kill Bumpy with a knife in a surprise attack, but Bumpy disarmed him and left a permanent scar on his face. Rollins didn't forget. He retaliated by killing an innocent person in the neighborhood just to send a message. Violence escalated rapidly, with dozens dead on both sides, street shootouts, beatings at lottery spots, and an atmosphere of terror that gripped the entire community. Eyewitnesses from the era described Harlem as a battlefield, with businesses closing and people afraid to go out at night. Seeing that the war wouldn't end on its own, Bumpy reached out to Charles Lucky Luciano, the Italian mafia boss who controlled New York. Luciano listened but didn't intervene right away. The turning point came when Schultz, feeling cornered, planned to assassinate federal prosecutor Thomas Dewey to escape his troubles. According to historical reports, for Luciano and the syndicate, that would have been collective suicide. The chaos would draw attention, and attention would bring the FBI. Schultz had to be stopped. He was gunned down in a New Jersey restaurant and died shortly afterward in a hospital. His empire crumbled, and Harlem breathed a sigh of relief. Bumpy and Street Claire celebrated their victory. For the first time in years, the neighborhood was at peace. But that peace was fragile. When one predator falls, another is always waiting in the wings. The deal with Lucky Luciano and Dominion in Harlem. With Dutch Schultz out of the picture, Lucky Luciano didn't waste time making his move. He wanted full control of Harlem's underground lotteries, and if that required eliminating Bumpy, he wouldn't hesitate. But Bumpy didn't sit idly by. He wasn't going to let another white man steal what his community had earned through blood and loyalty. A week after Schultz's death, Luciano requested another meeting. This time there were no initial threats, just a conversation between two men who understood that, with the war barely over, the future had to be built, or everything would erupt again. Luciano listened first, and Bumpy was straightforward. He knew he couldn't win an all-out war against the mafia boss, but he also couldn't allow Harlem to fall into outsider hands. He insisted that control of the numbers, at least in his neighborhood, remain with African Americans. Luciano, taken aback by Bumpy's resolve, considered a bit. He promised not to touch the operators who had sided with Bumpy during the war, but made it clear that any new lottery in Harlem would fall under mafia oversight. Bumpy didn't stop there. He played his final card. Then let's do it together. Make me your partner here. Nothing moves in Harlem without me, not even you. The proposal was bold. Become Luciano's official partner in Harlem, with real voice, power, and a genuine share of the profits. Hours passed, tension mounted. At one point, Luciano stared at him coldly. Don't you realize I'm doing you a favor? I could kill you and take everything. Bumpy, calm and unflinching, replied with a half smile. I know, but I also know you're too smart a businessman to do something that stupid. In that moment, Luciano realized he wasn't dealing with just another street gangster, but a man who knew how to play at the highest level. After hours of discussion, calculated glances, and tense silences, both men laughed and sealed the deal. Bumpy Johnson had achieved the unthinkable, negotiating peace with New York's most feared boss and coming out on top. From that day forward, Harlem treated him like royalty. Free drinks in the bars, everyone wanting to get close in the clubs, women admiring him, celebrities greeting him. But what proudest him most was the respect of the Italian mafia. They knew they couldn't touch his lotteries or interfere with his business without consequences. Bumpy wasn't just another player. He was the only African American who had stared down the mafia and walked away with an agreement. That peace lasted until 1936, when Luciano was arrested for pandering, ushering in a darker chapter. Bumpy and Luciano maintained a close relationship. They played chess regularly, and Bumpy became the primary Harlem partner for what would later become the Genovese crime family. His criminal career inspired films and television, but in the neighborhood, his dominance was real and absolute. Prisons, returns, and shifting power. Bumpy Johnson was no stranger to prison. In fact, he was arrested more than 40 times over the course of his life and served 2 major sentences on narcotics-related charges. But one of the toughest chapters began in 1937, a year after Luciano's downfall. According to accounts from the era, Bumpy was convicted for defending one of the women under his protection. Charged with criminal assault, he was sentenced to 10 years in Dannemora, a harsh, freezing New York prison notorious for its extreme conditions. Curiously, it was the same facility where his old partner Lucky Luciano was being held. Rumor has it that during his time in Dannemora, Bumpy saved Luciano's life confronting a man who tried to stab him in the prison yard. In gratitude, Lucky ensured Bumpy received top-quality Italian food throughout his sentence. He served exactly 10 years. Released in 1947, Bumpy returned to a Harlem that was no longer the one he had left behind. Something had changed. Everything felt more controlled, more foreign, as if Italian hands had tightened their grip while he was away. When he expressed his intent to open a new lottery, warnings came quickly. The Italians controlled everything now. They might not even let him operate, but Bumpy was never intimidated by rumors. He requested a meeting with Joe Adonis, the interim boss, now handling Luciano's affairs. Adonis greeted him with gifts, smiles, and polished speeches. But beneath the theatrics, the message was clear. You're no longer the king of Harlem. Your deal with the mafia is over. Bumpy listened, smiled coldly, and stood to leave with his men. Before walking out, he looked at Adonis and said, "Put it in writing, let our mutual friend know what's going on, and that I'm not happy about it. Also tell him it was a pleasure helping him during our shared absence." War didn't resume, but the tension was palpable, and Bumpy was once again ready to reclaim what was his. Sometime later, Adonis, still annoyed and puzzled, asked, "Why didn't you tell me what you did for our friend?" Bumpy, as always, direct. "It wasn't my place to say." That shifted the tone of the relationship. The tension eased, and Harlem once again had its king. Bumpy regained his position. The mafia respected his territory. He was able to open his own lottery on the street of his choosing, and the money flowed once more. As before and as always, his reputation and respect grew. Everything was going well, at least for a while, in a Harlem that continued to recognize his influence despite the shifting power dynamics. The Flash Walker incident and the narcotics fall. Everything was going well until Flash Walker appeared in December 1948. Flash was young, orphaned, penniless, just 19 years old, but with a charisma that could disarm anyone. A mutual acquaintance introduced him to Bumpy, describing him as someone who just needed a chance. That night, out of pure compassion, Bumpy hired him to help his wife with household chores. What started as a simple favor quickly turned into closeness. Flash had something special, a way of talking, moving, and worming his way into people's trust. Bumpy began to appreciate him perhaps too much, to the point that his own daughters started feeling jealous. The relationship grew fast, too fast. In no time, Flash was working on one of the lotteries. He was brilliant at persuading people to bet more than they could afford, and he became the operation's most profitable employee. With success came trust. Bumpy started taking Flash to meetings, even to sit downs with the Italians. Flash was no longer just an employee, he was part of the inner circle. But in 1949, everything changed. Flash met a pimp who offered him an easy side hustle, cashing stolen checks, no questions asked, no bank involved, quick, quiet, and profitable. Flash accepted. To him, it was just extra money on the side, nothing serious. At least, that's what he thought. Until he made the unforgivable mistake, cashing the checks through Bumpy Johnson's personal bank account. 4 months later, the phone rang. It was the bank. Something didn't add up with the transactions. They asked him to come in immediately, and when he arrived, he learned about the fraud. He managed to fix it in time with cash, connections, and pressure. But it was already too late. The damage wasn't on paper. It was personal, a breach of trust. He returned home furious, pacing like a caged animal. Because this wasn't just financial betrayal, it was a direct threat to his name, his respect, his safety. Then, one of his daughters approached him and told him that Flash had groped her, and she wasn't the only one. It had happened to her sister too, and not for the first time. The words were barely out of their mouths when Bumpy was already out the door, jumping into his Cadillac. He didn't say a word. He spotted Flash, got out of the car, walked up, and landed a punch square in his face. Flash had time to react, but next came Bumpy on top of him, beating him, screaming, hurling every insult imaginable. The rage was absolute. Days later, Bumpy discussed it with his old friends, and they all agreed on the same thing. You should have killed him. That kid's no longer a mistake, he's a dangerous enemy. But for some reason, Bumpy didn't take the final step. Maybe out of compassion, maybe nostalgia. What he didn't know was that this decision would haunt him forever. He did what few in his world would do. He spared the life of his betrayer. He ignored his men's advice. Perhaps, deep down, he still felt something for Flash. Perhaps he thought a beating would be enough. He was gravely mistaken. Flash Walker didn't just leave, he plotted revenge. And he did it in the dirtiest, most cowardly way possible. Hiding a package of heroin in Bumpy's home and then tipping off the police to frame him. One goal only: destroy him. When Bumpy and his crew learned of the plan, they called an emergency meeting. There was no time to lose, they went out looking for him, but they were too late. That same night, Bumpy was arrested. 2 narcotics agents showed up at his house, handcuffed him, and took him straight to the bureau. There he learned the full story. Flash had informed on him, claiming he worked for Bumpy selling drugs. The charge made no sense. No one, not even the agents themselves, could picture Bumpy Johnson trafficking heroin. He had never been linked to that business. But this time, facts didn't matter. Convenience did. The feds stepped in and saw the perfect opportunity, snare a respected figure and force him to inform on the real drug kingpins in Harlem. The problem was, Bumpy never talked. He spent a fortune on lawyers, connections, and favors everything a man unwilling to bend could do. But the system wasn't seeking justice. They wanted a trophy, and Bumpy Johnson was ideal. The feds pressured him relentlessly. They wanted names, networks, information. Every time they tried, Bumpy's only response was, "Go to hell." Trial day arrived in June 1952. He had to spend months out on bail, but everything would be decided in that courtroom. The jury didn't take long, just 3 hours of deliberation to seal his fate. Guilty on 2 counts of drug trafficking. His loved ones were in shock. The man who had ruled Harlem with honor and a code was sentenced to 15 years in prison. They sent him to Alcatraz, the most feared penitentiary in the country. What did you find most shocking about Bumpy Johnson's life? His war against the Italian mafia, Flash Walker's betrayal, or how he dominated Harlem as a black man in that era? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Time in Alcatraz and the triumphant return. Alcatraz was the most dreaded prison in the nation, a fortified island in San Francisco Bay where inmates had numbers, not names. The guards broke you from day one with strict rules and the company of America's worst criminals. Bumpy served most of his sentence there, 10 years in total, enduring isolation and enforced silence, yet never broken. He kept his mind sharp, surrounded by an imposed quiet broken only by the echo of waves crashing against the rocks. There are no official records detailing his daily routine, but public accounts suggest that, like other famous inmates, he focused on mental survival, perhaps reading or reflecting on his life in Harlem. In 1963, he was paroled after serving the required time. His return to Harlem was presidential. The streets filled with people waiting for him, applauding, throwing confetti from windows, and shouting his name. After a decade behind bars, he was back and Harlem was still his, proving the neighborhood's unwavering loyalty to a man who had shaped its history. The crowd cheered him on. With tears in his eyes, he waved from the car as if he knew this ovation might be his last. He rose slowly from his seat, looked at his people, his neighborhood, this Harlem that still welcomed him like a king. It felt like a triumphant homecoming, yet also a quiet farewell, because although his spirit remained unbroken, his body was beginning to show the toll of years of stress and confinement, final years and death. After his 1963 release, Bumpy maintained his influence in Harlem, though his health started to decline. By early 1967, heart problems struck hard, limiting his daily activities in a neighborhood that still viewed him as a cornerstone. Public accounts say he insisted to his last breath that he had been falsely framed in the 1,950 seconds narcotics case, though he did later enter that trade, marking a shift that contrasted with his earlier focus on gambling and protection. A year later, on the 7th of July 1968, while preparing to dine at Wells Restaurant in Harlem just before 2 a.m., his heart gave out. The waitress had just served him coffee, a chicken thigh, and hominy grits when he collapsed, clutching his chest. He was rushed by ambulance to Harlem Hospital, where he was pronounced dead at age 62 from congestive heart failure. At the time, he still faced federal drug conspiracy charges, but his death closed that chapter without judicial resolution. His passing shook Harlem. It marked the end of a figure who for better or worse had defined an era in the underworld. He is buried in Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx, New York, a site still visited today by those who remember his impact on the community. Legacy of Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy Johnson left a complex and enduring legacy in Harlem. Many remember him as the neighborhood's Robin Hood, a gangster who protected his community, helped the needy, and provided shelter in tough times. In an era of profound racial discrimination, he was the only African American to achieve absolute power in Harlem from the 1,930 seconds through the 1,960 seconds, controlling illegal lotteries and every illicit racket. Police, politicians, and even the Italian mafia had to go through him to operate there, earning him a position as key partner to figures like Lucky Luciano and the future Genovese family. Intelligent and charismatic, he could have become a lawyer or doctor, but he chose the power of the streets. He defied the mafia with few men and survived, spent roughly 26 years of his life in prison, and still defined an era. He maintained he was framed in the 1,950 seconds, though he later entered the drug trade. For many, he remains the symbol of a Harlem that never fully bowed. His story lives on in the streets, in TV series and films, and in the memories of those who know that some legends are born in the shadows but never truly die. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the story of Bumpy Johnson, a key chapter in America's criminal underworld. If you enjoyed it, leave a comment with your thoughts or who else you'd like to see featured. Subscribe if you liked the video for more respectful and thorough narrations of these real lives. Before we say goodbye, tell me in the comments, which other American outlaw or organized crime figure would you like us to cover in the next video? Drop the name below, we'll consider it for the next one. See you in the next one.